somebody else chimed in and said, for a person who starts out in risk management doing ATO stuff for the government, no technical skills, do you recommend them getting a technical role to be more effective? What do you think about that, Will?
I think it doesn't hurt as a way to pivot in. And I'll say that what served me, and again, I was an IT services manager for the Army, and I was mostly system administrator, network administrator, and then just overall operations, help desk operations is what my bread and butter was. So I was really good with the technology, right? And layering onto that, part of when I was an IT director, I had a section where they were responsible for information security. So they had to, so I had to know a little bit about everything. I knew enough to be dangerous. I knew enough to get the CISSP. I got that while I was in the Army. But when it came to, so that helped me when I transitioned, and I had to, as again, I constantly say, go back last week where Bruce was talking about how to engage with other departments when it comes to being a security manager, right? So you might get a vulnerability scan, like scan results, and see something. You might not be the one as the security practitioner actually doing the security, or the security manager doing the scans. You might have to go to the vulnerability management team and ask them like, hey, yeah, I'm seeing a discrepancy between this week's scans and next week's scans. I see a whole bunch of several more devices that weren't a part of the original baseline. What's going on there? Did we integrate some new systems, or like what's going on there? Were those systems that were offline for a long period of time and just got back on? That's why they weren't on last week's report. So you might have to get some clarification, but understanding that the difference between a server and a workstation versus a router versus a VPN, different types of assets, coming from a technical background, that does help to where you're not having to try to figure out what technology is in order to ask that. And then the other thing is, like, when I'm doing an assessment and I'm asking for evidence, I know where that department can get evidence from. So if I'm asking for an example, show me how you're doing identity access management and specifically your password management policy, where you say that look at your physical written policy that says that all passwords are 12 characters, have to be complex, a combination of upper, lowercase letters, special characters, and numbers, right? You have that in your policy saying that's what you're implementing. When I'm doing an assessment on that control, I have the documentation. Okay, you have articulated what the requirement is. Now show me that you're actually doing it. But if I don't have an understanding of technology, really what you do is you pull up your Active Directory or your Azure Intra ID, and then you pull up that group policy, and then you show that policy, and it shows, okay, these are all the requirements for that policy. And you can see that, or you can ask them, even if you're not send me a screenshot of it. And then you look at the timestamp, like, oh yeah, that's today's date. And then this is the setting. So I know it, but if you don't have a familiarity with the technology, you don't know even who to talk to. So you come into an organization, do an assessment, especially on the private side, you sit in an organization and like, you need to know, you need to talk to the guy that manages your Active Directory infrastructure, not your help desk guy. He might not be doing group policy work. He's just unlocking passwords and resetting accounts, right? So that understanding the technology, I think, is important. So it's important, but not necessarily like you don't need it, but you do need to have a background in like an understanding of foundational IT. So even if you didn't have that as a role, doing some basic course instruction. There's a bunch of free stuff out there on YouTube, Professor Messer, A+. Like if you want to, we'll go back to like certification and kind of bridge the gap. So I wouldn't recommend anybody, like, unless you're doing a pure help desk role and they're asking for it, to actually get the A+ certification. But the knowledge that you get when you're doing the course, when you're studying for A+, using the resources like Professor Messer, where he's explaining all the different aspects of the A+ exam and all the requirements and going over all the knowledge areas, getting that knowledge is what's important so that you're able to have those conversations with the technical side of things.
Yes, I would. First of all, I agree with everything Will just said. I do recommend that you do a technical role to be more effective. Do you have to? You don't. I've got peers that don't have a technical background, or they're not super technical. The more technical your background is, the more effective you'll be as a GRC person. I've got another question here that kind of piggybacks into this. Somebody said, what programming languages do you know? I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not a programmer. You don't have to be a programmer to do GRC. Is it helpful if I knew that? If I knew how to do a Python or something, it would be helpful to my organization, to my role, to my job, the current job I'm doing. Not really. I don't. So you don't have to be a programmer. You don't have to be an elite network engineer or a pen tester or something like that. Do you have to know technology? I would say so. You're going to have to know, you have to have the fundamentals down. And like
Yeah.
Will mentioned, if you could just go through the parts of, say, A plus certification, if you could at least know that knowledge, not necessarily take the certification if you don't want to. It's a marketable, it's not a bad certification, but the knowledge that you get from there is foundational. Like you'll need to know that stuff.